The last time we touched base, we talked about the coordinated management of meaning theory. That theory, as I described, really falls alongside the interpretivist perspective. And then today I'm going to move you along and introduce a new theory to you called Elaboration likelihood model. This theory definitely takes on a quantitative, empirical perspective. In order to really situate our understanding around this theory, I want you to take a moment, just take a moment to stop and reflect around the last time you bought a box of cereal. Now, buying cereal is something that, for a lot of us, if you consume and eat cereal, is something that you make the decision pretty quickly. You don't really, at least for me, I don't really sit there and look at each box, look at the different kinds of cereals, flavors. I just kind of go with what I'm used to, or go with some product that a friend or family member recommended, and I'll pick that up. Versus, think about the last time you bought a car or thought about buying a car. The process of buying a box of cereal and buying a car or a vehicle is definitely not on the same caliber. There's money, there's energy, there's time involved, there's kind of an idea of how long this is going to last you, the durability of it, right? There's a lot of factors that make these decisions differently. But in the world that we live in, we're faced with decisions that need to be made on a daily basis. And we rely on our own thinking, our own decision-making processes to help guide us through these decisions. And that's what an elaboration likelihood model is. If you are a psychology major or have taken a psychology class, this theory, elaboration likelihood model, or ELM, should be something you are quite familiar with because it's a foundational psychological theory. This is a theoretical model that analyzes the likelihood that people will elaborate cognitively and engage in issue-related thinking on any information presented in a persuasive message. So let me break this down for you. Two theorists, Petty and Cacioppo, I may butcher that, but in the late 1980s, I think in 1986 I believe that's correct, they introduced this model to kind of really dig deeper in understanding how people make decisions and how people elaborate. So when you hear the word elaborate and the word elaboration, just think about thinking, how some person or you are thinking, you're elaborating in your head. So they wanted to understand that. Move this along. They wanted to understand the process of thought. This is a statue, a work of art called The Thinker, French piece, and essentially this photo, this statue, represents, in my opinion, this theory, because it really allows us to think in a way and really understand the two ways that people make decisions. There are two routes. So when you are faced with a decision to make, you process the information and you process that decision in two ways. The first one is the central route. This is message elaboration, and the path follows the processing of a message in a very scrutinized way. You really have to think about the decision you're going to make when you process information in the central route. There's message elaboration, and this usually happens when something, the issue at hand, the topic, is relevant to us. So when we buy a car, when we are thinking about, if you should go to grad school or not, if you're thinking about whether you should propose to someone or not, all of these decisions have high stakes, or should at least have high stakes. But we really have to cognitively think about these decisions when we make them. And we process this form of high stakes thinking in the central route. And the other route's the opposite of that. It's called the peripheral route. And we rely on mental shortcuts that allow us to accept or reject a message based on its relevancy. So this is also called click word, or their pre-programmed responses. It's kind of when we make a decision on autopilot. Other people call this heuristics. So again, when we buy a box of cereal, when we're ordering food at a drive-thru, we're not sitting there weighing all the options, really thinking about what's happening, right? We rely on our mental shortcuts. A lot of this work takes place in the realm of persuasion research and communication. So when we think about, so although this theory is a psychological theory at its core, we rely on it in communication when we try to understand how people persuade others to do things, to act, to think certain ways. A lot of the fundamental research in this field pays attention to these shortcuts that we take as human beings. Robert Cialdini, who was a professor at Arizona State University, really focused and invested a lot of time in understanding how people are lazy when they make decisions. What kind of heuristics, what kind of mental shortcuts do we engage in? And he came up with 6. It's been updated, but these are the 6 core heuristics, the 6 core shortcuts we take. The first one is reciprocity. You know, it plays on this notion that you've done something for me, so I will do something for you. You owe me. The other one is consistency. We've always done this way. I've always gotten Lucky Charms as a cereal, so I'm going to keep getting Lucky Charms at the grocery store, right? Social proof. Well, everybody's doing it, so maybe I should do it. You know, everyone's getting a pumpkin spice latte nowadays. The next time I'm at Starbucks, I'm going to get a pumpkin spice latte. The next one is liking. So we see a lot of this with celebrity endorsements or people we look up to and like. So, you know, if Cardi B is going to tell you to fill out the census, so she goes on Instagram and talks about how the census is so important and you should fill it out because you like Cardi B and because you admire her, you like her music, whatever, you're more likely to go complete the census because she told you about it. And if you're in a moment to make a decision around whether you should do the census or not because you like Cardi B and because it pops in your head, you're more likely to do it. Authority. So just because someone says so or just because I say so, you're more likely to do it. So if you're faced with a decision that you're really not really that you're not that invested in, but someone who has authority over you or someone that you give authority to says to do it, you're more likely to do it. The last one is scarcity. So if something is running out, if something is about to be gone, we're more likely to act on it quickly. We rely on this heuristic a lot because, hey, it's going to be gone. We're humans. It's kind of a primal need for us to be convinced otherwise when something is running low. I'm going to break down each of these fairly quickly, and I just want to give a few examples. So in reciprocity or reciprocation, people are they feel obliged, they feel obligated to give back to others in the form of a behavior, a gift, a service that they've received first. So, you know, if you are invited to a party by a friend, the next time you throw a party, you're more likely to invite them. You're going to invite them, whether you don't like them that much. But if you're thinking about it, that is the essence of what reciprocity is. People have studied this. So Cialdini studied this in terms of how reciprocity worked in tips. So if you worked at a restaurant and you have ever, maybe what restaurant really does this? A lot of restaurants do this, but Olive Garden, I think Olive Garden does this. If you go to Olive Garden, at the end of your meal, you get chocolates, right? Those, I mean, maybe they're just being nice, but research has shown there was an experiment done where a server would provide the check to the patron and leave a mint. And that was one condition. The other condition to see if reciprocity influenced positive behavior was the server didn't provide a mint. Well, interestingly enough, uh, when a single mint was added to the check at the end, so they actually put a mint on the check, tips increased around 3%. But they wanted to see if you doubled it, if you gave 2 mints, what happened? If you gave 2 mints, the tips uh, didn't double necessarily, but they increased. If you gave 3 mints, the tips quadrupled by 14%. Perhaps all of this is really just going to show that the key of reciprocity is to be given first and then you give. So this is an interesting thing that you can, test the next time you're at a restaurant. Consistency. People like to be consistent with their previous behavior. No one likes to be wishy-washy or look like they flip-flopped on an issue. So consistency is activated by looking at initial commitments. People want to remain committed. So in an experiment, I'm keep on saying experiment because people are trying to test this theory. So really, get yourself thinking about, you kind of see the difference how this is quantitative. So in an experiment researchers were trying to understand whether or not people really remain consistent and how that influenced their behavior. So what they did was they wanted to see how far they could persuade a person to engage in a behavior in terms of supporting safe driving in a neighborhood. So what they did first was that they went door to door and they provided a little postcard that said, I support this drive safely campaign in this neighborhood. And they asked them, would you be able to put this on your window? The respondents, majority of them said yes. They went back a second time, like about a month later, and they said, since you put this on your window, would you be willing to put a sign on your front yard? So the commitment here is larger. So no more are you just showing a postcard. Now you're putting a sign in your yard. Interestingly, 4 times as many homeowners indicated they were willing to erect this sign. This was a big sign, though, not a small sign. This was a big sign. So I'm just giving you quick and dirty experimental anecdotes here, but it's a form of consistency. We want to remain consistent. Social proof, especially when people are uncertain, people will look to others to determine behavior. So we look to others to make us feel better about the decisions we make if we're unsure. If you've ever stayed at a hotel and you've gotten a card or seen a card in your room that says, the previous guests in this hotel were willing to recycle their towels, will you be willing to do that? Or they give you a percentage. By providing that in your hotel room, it signals to you that, hey, a lot of people, the majority of people who stay here, the crowd that stays here does this. So I don't really have a position on it, so I'm more likely to do this. This has been empirically tested. All right, liking. Simply put, people prefer to say yes to those they like. So advertisements work this way. Super Bowl commercials, all these celebrity endorsements that you see, they influence the way that we make decisions. So if we're unsure or we really don't care about a particular issue, so say your favorite athlete endorses a toothpaste, and the next time you're at the grocery store, if you don't really care and you don't necessarily have a preference for toothpaste, if you see that toothpaste and associate it with the celebrity you really admire, you're more likely, and it's been tested, you're more likely to buy that product. Authority, it's kind of the same realm. We follow the ideas of people that we think are credible and experts. And then lastly, simply put, scarcity. People want more of things they will have less of. Think about COVID earlier this year, the toilet paper scare, the Lysol scare, the hand sanitizer scare off the shelves. Although that a big event catapulted us to do that behavior and wipe the shelves, a lot of times if something is limited, this pumpkin spice latte is limited at, Starbucks. The Shamrock shake is limited at McDonald's. People want to be able to get it as, during the time frame that it's being featured. It's talking a lot about McDonald's and Starbucks. But anyways, what I'm trying to get at here is that when things are scarce, when we think that things will go away, we will act on this heuristic, this shortcut. And if we don't really care about the issue, so if we're just thirsty, or if we want to be refreshed, or we want coffee and we're at Starbucks and they say limited time edition, why don't you try this? It's going to go away soon. Well, if you don't really care, you're going to go buy the pumpkin spice latte. Simply put. This is the model in action. And I'm being cognizant of time. We're at the 16-minute mark, so I just want to run through this kind of quickly. But this is the model of elaboration likelihood. You can process in either the central root, and follow my mouse here as I'm talking so this can make sense. You can process through the central root, or you can process through the peripheral root. Remember the peripheral root, a moment ago we talked about these heuristics, these shortcuts we take, the 6 of them. So if a message is being communicated to you, say persuasive communication, say someone wants to enforce a zero tolerance policy around alcohol, and drunk and driving. So that's a very targeted message. It's a very high stakes message. For instance, let me give you a little bit of context. This zero tolerance policy is from a study. I pulled this directly from an article. In this article, what was discussed was they wanted to see the likelihood of people being persuaded toward voting on a zero tolerance policy on alcohol consumption and driving. So if you drove, and even if you just had a drink of a glass of wine or one beer, that would be illegal. So that was the persuasive communication. It led to asking, is the participant motivated to participate in this process? If they're not, if you have no motivation, you directly rely on a heuristic. If you have motivation and you're able to process this idea, this communication, then you go down to assessing the quality of the argument. But if you're not able to process, if you're distracted, you rely on a heuristic. And then if something is favorable in your nature, it leads to positive change. If it's unfavorable, it leads to negative change. Or if it's neutral, it leads to no change at all. What I want to point out here is what this is so important. Weak attitude change. So when we make a decision, when we don't really care about the outcome, say buying a box of cereal, yes, we may be persuaded to do it because of a celebrity or a commercial we watched, or because it's a limited time or a limited edition of the cereal or the drink or whatever. Down the road, it's going to lead to weak attitude change. We're not going to care about the product. We're not going to care about the decision because we relied on a heuristic. Versus the central processing route, when we're actually able to think about a message and think about communication and think about what people want us to do, we are more likely to continuously engage and think about what's happening. Again, the less relevant something is to you, the more credibility cues play a role. So if you don't really care about an issue or an issue is not important to you, the more likely you are to rely on a heuristic, on a shortcut. Okay, remember that. If you don't care about something, if something is less relevant, you rely on a heuristic. If something is relevant to you and you're motivated and you're able to process what's happening, so say someone's trying to sell you a car and you are motivated to buy a car and you are able to buy a car, you are more likely to critically think about that decision. Again, motivation and ability equals or leads to the likelihood that you will think, process, and consider your stance on an issue. We always do not really start on a blank slate. So a lot of times there's this term here called biased elaboration. And this is kind of top-down thinking, which predetermines our understanding of an issue. What this is saying is that if someone brings to you a claim or tries to persuade you to do something, most likely you already are biased. You already have a stance. If someone wants to come and talk to you about immigration and have a strict policy on immigration, you most likely right now maybe have a stance on immigration. So you have this biased elaboration process you're engaging because you already have a stance. Versus objective elaboration really occurs when we have no idea about what a topic is. If someone wants you, if you have no idea on gardening and planting, and someone's trying to convince you to buy a plant or to start a garden, you're really going to start off at a very objective place because you don't have information to help back you up. So you're going to sit there and you're actually going to engage in something called objective elaboration, and it's kind of bottom-up thinking, where this truth is sought wherever it may lead. So bias elaboration, a moment ago, what we just talked about, was when we already have a position. Objective elaboration is when we do not have a position. All right, we are coming towards the end of this. I want to keep it below 25 minutes. So I wanted to talk about these three things. When we think about a position, the more we think about a position, so the more that you're able to elaborate and think about a position, think about what you feel around an issue, that thought or your stance is going to persist over time. You're going to be able to think about it more over time, and you're going to have actually a resistance to be counter-persuade. So if you are pro-life and you've been pro-life, we're talking about abortion here, if you've been pro-life for a long time and you already have your decisions and your understandings around why you support being pro-life, that behavior persists over time. And when someone who is pro-choice tries to convince you otherwise, you're more likely to be counter-persuaded. You're more likely just not to hear it. And your stance right now predicts your future behavior, so you're more likely to stay in line with your thought and your train of thought. The same thing applies if you're pro-choice and you've always been pro-choice, and someone who's pro-life tries to convince you otherwise. You're going to have to really critically elaborate in order for you to change your mind. Now, there is power in terms of peripheral cues. So we're taking a moment now and we're taking a look at these shortcuts. When we rely on shortcuts, we do it because there are rewards usually involved. Things like food, sex, money, things that make us feel good as people. If we're able to attain those rewards easily, we're going to not think about it twice. We're going to go for it. Credibility plays a role. If you trust where a message is coming from, say the CDC, if they say, you know what, you don't need to wear a mask tomorrow because COVID-19 doesn't transmit via air droplets, because it comes from the CDC, we're not going to do our own research. You're not going to go on Google Scholar and look up these articles and corroborate what the CDC says. You're going to follow the CDC because the CDC has credibility. So that's the power of peripheral cues. If we let people attain a sense of credibility from us, if we think they're credible, you give people power and you allow them to persuade you. Those that lack persistence, invulnerability, and kind of a link to behavior. So what this is saying is that there's power in these shortcuts because These are issues that people don't think about, that people are kind of invulnerable to thought about. And these are directly linked to the way that we behave. We really do not want to be thinking a lot as human beings when we make decisions. We make decisions on a daily basis. So if we can make a decision that's easiest for us, we're going to take a shortcut. Now, if you're the persuader, if you're the marketer, if you're the advertiser, if you're the person trying to convince someone of something, you need to consider a few things. If the audience is motivated and the audience is able to think about your issue, you gotta be ready to provide them with solid information, solid evidence, because it's your job. If someone is already, if you're gonna try to convince someone to buy your car, buy the car that you are advertising, and they wanna buy a car, okay, I don't know what happened here, but they want to buy a car and they are ready to buy a car and they have the ability to listen to you, you better show up with your evidence to show that the car you're selling is a good car. Otherwise, if the stakes aren't that high and if it's kind of irrelevant and someone just needs to rent a quick car or, buy a car really quickly, I'm not sure who's able to really, cars and investments, so that's why I'm hesitant to say this, but if the decision is irrelevant, if it's less relevant, say you're going to rent a car and you just need it for a day, whatever car looks good to you, if you are, choosing between a Prius and another car, if you think, Priuses are fuel economical, so they're good on gas, you're more likely to choose the Prius because, you want to save money. It's just a quick car you're renting. It's not that deep. It's not that serious. That's elaboration likelihood in a nutshell. It's just this theory that helps us try to decipher and understand how do people make decisions. We make decisions on a daily basis. If an issue is important to us, we process that through the central route. If it's not that important, if it's not that deep, we don't really care that much, but the decision needs to be made, we rely on heuristics, and we process that through the peripheral route. I'm going to cut it right here. This module, all you're required to do is go ahead and watch this, and I will upload this shortly. All right, I'll see you all next week. Take care.